Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos.
Hola. Buenas tardes.
¿Cómo están? Les agradezco primero que estén
Hola.
aquí. Les voy a pedir a todos el favor de que apaguemos micrófonos y cámaras. La idea es que la modalidad será por el medio del chat y así tratamos de tener mejor señal todos. Mil gracias de nuevo a todos por estar aquí y en breves minutos arrancamos. Gracias.
And do you want me to start?
Santiago is going to start. Let's give 5 more minutes so everybody can get here. Please.
Okay, good.
Thank
Yep,
you.
absolutely.
If you want, you can start like talking to the participants. And
I will. Hello, everybody. If you're here already, we're waiting for about 5 more minutes to actually begin the presentation. But if you're here already, I would love it if you would just drop on the chat line, just chat and tell me who you are, so I get to know who's actually on the chat. I am looking at it right now and I can see Isabel, Francisco, oh, Maria, and I think I see Connie up there. But if you can just drop me a chat, I'll have an idea of who's going to be watching. Oh, hi, Connie. So as we go along in the presentation, I will try not to speak too quickly in English. I know that sometimes I speak too quickly. So I will try to stay slower. And I really would like a few of your questions if there's something that's not clear that I'm talking about. One of the things that I want you to know is that this is really an overview presentation. There's not nearly enough time to go into a lot of detail in any of the subjects. This is the overview, and then hopefully in the future, if this goes well, which I think it will, we're going to go ahead and do some more in-depth presentations that I can deal with more detail in. And I do hope that you'll all be here for those presentations as well. But still, I really do want to see your questions, and I will do what I can to answer them. If they're too personal for you and your horse, maybe that's a time for some in the future on a one-on-one lesson or something like that we can deal with. One of the other things I would like to say is if you have difficulty accessing the chat or the video, I am certainly not your person to talk to because I'm not an IT person. I'm doing this with a lot of help from Isabel and also from my friend Carolyn, who is in here in the back and who was at the Pan Am Games cheering on the Colombian Federation with me. And so Carolyn is helping me. But if you have difficulty accessing the chat or the video, please text Rosario or Isabel, and they're probably both a lot better than I am at dealing with those problems. Hey, boss. Hi, Raul. Nice to see you again. Anyhow, how are we doing? There seems to be a few people here now.
Yeah, I think we can start. So maybe Santiago can do the welcoming.
Okay,
Santiago is our National Federation President, and welcome, Santiago.
Gracias, Isabel. Buenas tardes para todos. Es para mí un gusto saludarlos a todos y cada uno de ustedes, al igual saludar a nuestra instructora Shannon Dueck. Como ustedes bien saben, Shannon es actualmente la entrenadora de la Federación Ecuestre de Colombia y seleccionadora para los equipos del ciclo olímpico. Ha sido jinete panamericana, ha estado en Copas del Mundo, ha ganado múltiples premios a lo largo de su vida y es una persona que cuenta con toda la experiencia y todo el conocimiento para transmitirnos y poder nosotros cada día tener mejores resultados, un mejor nivel y por supuesto muchas más medallas. Entonces, pues, no siendo más, Shannon no necesita mayor introducción porque todos la conocemos por sus triunfos. So, Shannon, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for joining this this presentation, which we hope is going to be the first one of many other that we're going to have in the future. And I just want to say, I want to thank you, and please begin with your lecture. And
Okay.
we're looking forward to learn in order to learn a lot of these presentations. Thank you very much.
Okay, gracias, Santiago. So hello to everybody who I know and who I don't know, and I look forward to meeting. And I'm hoping that soon that I can get back down to your beautiful country. I'm talking today, I'm just going to start this because we did already talk about your questions. If you can chat with me, that would be fabulous. I can answer, I will try to speak slowly and not go too quickly, because I understand that for most of you, English is your second language. But for me, mi español is really my fourth language. So it's, I thank you for being able to do this in English. So today I am, and help me, there we go, thank you. Today, I just thought I'd start in the big picture of how to get from Prix-St. George to Grand Prix. It's a very big jump. And this, that was somebody. The reason we want to go from Prix-St. George to Grand Prix, Colombia has some very, very good and very strong Prix-St. George riders, but we need to get forward from the Prix-St. George up to the Grand Prix level, through the medium level, which is Intermediate 2, Intermediate A, and Intermediate B. The reason we want to do the Grand Prix, well, even if you didn't have competitive goals, if you're strong at the small tour, we want to continue training. We're not done at this point, and we want to improve both as riders and trainers, and we want to improve our equine athletes and get them even stronger and more supple. It does help them maintain their soundness through life if you do it right. Biggest reason for the Colombian Federation and for many of the South American federations is that pretty soon the Pan American Games will be at the medium or large tour. And the reason for that, we think that's going to happen anyway. The reason that's going to happen, probably, is that it is an Olympic qualifier. And there have been problems in the past that teams that get an Olympic spot at the Pan American Games cannot field a team for the Olympic Games. So it is important that we go forward to this spot, and it is important that Colombia gets a plan in place to be able to develop their horses and riders up to the medium and eventually the large tour. And it's a very big jump. But also, not just for the Colombian Federation, but if any of you riders have your individual goals of Olympics or World Championships or World Cup, well, we have to do that at the Olympic level. So we want to get up to that level. And the other reason is it's really fun when it's done well. Doing ones and piaffe and passage and doing all of that is quite an accomplishment, and it is a blast when it goes well. It's not so much fun when it doesn't, but that can be true at third level as well. So now we know why we want to get to Grand Prix. Then a good question is, how long does it take to get Grand Prix? So when I say this number of years, this is from a good training level, okay? It's not from Prix-St. George, but from a good training level horse that's 5 years old, say, it's gonna take at least 4 years. And if you say 4 years, that is with everything working for you. You have a strong and a talented horse with a lot of aptitude for it. You have a very good trainer on board to be able to get that horse to baby Grand Prix. Even with top trainers, it's often 5 years or more. Horses, even with top trainers, some develop faster, some develop slower. It doesn't mean they don't have the aptitude, but sometimes it takes longer than 4 or 5 years. And that's, of course, thinking that you don't have an injury that puts a horse out for 6 months. So that's with everything going really, really well. It's okay though, because the minimum age for competing international is 8 years of age. And there's very, very few 8-year-olds that do International Grand Prix, very few. There's a few 9-year-olds. Most horses probably don't start until they're 11 or 12 years of age. If you're waiting till they're 15 or 16 to start International Grand Prix, you maybe don't have enough time within the sound life of your horse to get them to their ultimate, but that's okay too. It doesn't really matter to the horse, does it? One thing to realize about doing Grand Prix is that your first Grand Prix is really a huge accomplishment, but it's going to kindergarten. It is the beginning of Grand Prix. It takes another probably 4 years of training and competing Grand Prix to do your best. And when you see a horse like Vallegro, he started Grand Prix at 71%. And that was an amazing, amazing debut. But it took him 4 years. Even Vallegro and Charlotte and Carl, it took them 4 years to be getting routinely high 70s, 80s, what that horse and rider could really accomplish. So it's a long journey. Now, one of the things, this is a little dicey at the bottom, I say perfecting the small tour might delay your success at Grand Prix. Because if you're trying to perfect your small tour horse to get 80% internationally, it's already obviously a very good horse, but you're not training enough of the Grand Prix to get there in time. So doing good small tour is important. Perfecting it, if your ultimate goal is Grand Prix, maybe not so important. Okay. Thank you. So now, question. Who can go to Grand Prix and how do you get there? Okay, this is a lot of information, but you have to start with, you have to have a talented horse. It really does take a lot of natural ability in a horse to be able to be a good Grand Prix horse. Most horses with 3 good gaits can do something like Grand Prix, but very few horses are top Grand Prix horses, as we know. It also takes some talent on the part of the rider. There's no doubt that you need to have talent as a rider to be able to become top in your field. That doesn't mean that you have to be the best, the most talented rider. You can do it with time, patience, and a lot of work, dedication. It is a sport. It takes a lot of fitness for both the horse and the rider. There should be cross-training of both horse and rider. Nobody goes and is an international Grand Prix horse when you ride a horse once a day, and that's all you do. Nobody does that. So it has to be, if you're going to go to the Olympics or any of these things, you have to treat both you and your horse as a top athlete. It also takes, to get there, you must have regular help from the ground with a Grand Prix experienced trainer. It's a whole different level. And you need to have somebody who knows what it means to have the Piaffe and the Passage and the 110 piece developed, and not just developed, but finished. You need to have somebody who's actually been riding down the center line at the Grand Prix level to understand all of the ring skills needed to be able to produce the movements one after another. You really do need some kind of Grand Prix experienced trainer. The nice thing is, in today's internet world, you can, even if you don't have that trainer in your backyard, which we're lucky enough to have in Wellington, and people in Europe all have them everywhere, you can do a lot via internet lessons, thank goodness. You do also, though, need to be studying what the top Grand Prix horses and trainers are doing, and really studying it. We have to take this seriously. So that means watching what you can right now on the internet and learning. There's a lot out there for learning possibilities. When things open up again, please come to Wellington. Watch these people train. Watch them in the warm-up. Don't watch them in the show ring, although that can teach you about how to ride in the show ring. It doesn't teach you how to train. Or going, you know, take your vacation, go to Aachen and watch them in the warm-up. Watch the best. It really helps develop your eye and develop your feel for when you get back on your horse afterwards. You need to understand the requirements of getting into top competitive international Grand Prix. We know from the Pan Am Games, I was there in Lima, we know from the Pan Am Games, there's really good Grand Prix going on. So that means we have to step up to the plate to be able to compete against people like Yvonne, who is very, very good. And of course, we also have the Americans and the Canadians who are also, I watch them just get better and better and better, but it's because they're doing all of these steps. Believe me, I've been in the Canadian Federation for a long time, and it hasn't always been this good. You need access to CDI competitions, and you need access to FEI judges. So, and I know that the Federation does what they can to bring really good judges down there and to do CDI competitions. But again, I cannot stress enough that you need to come outside of Colombia to know what we want to strive for. And then when you go back to Colombia, you can bring some of that. This last point is the biggest, one of the biggest points. You need really good farriers, you need a really good veterinarian and a veterinary team to help work with you, and you need great stable management practices, because this is really hard work for a horse as we're developing their athletic ability. And the stable management and how we produce these athletes is really, really important. If you think about how you would produce a top soccer player, the teamwork behind them is amazing. And then they can come to the pinnacle of their sport. Okay, so now I'm just giving a little pause here. I want, if anybody has any questions for what I've said, please, now would be the time to chat with me. And I'll try to answer. And if not, I'll just take a moment, and it doesn't sound like anybody does. Okay. All right, onward. That went backwards, not onward. Help me. There we go. All right. So I thought this was an interesting slide. This shows you clearly the difference between what a Prix St. George horse has to have and what a Grand Prix horse has to have. In the Prix St. George, the walk is relatively important, 16% of the marks. The trot is quite important, 34% of the marks. And the canter is incredibly important, 48% of your marks in a Prix St. George. So look at the difference between that and Grand Prix. The walk, it's still important. I've seen very nice Grand Prix that, like, the marks go way down with the bad walk, but it's only 10%. The trot, look at that, it's only 22. So that the relative importance of the quality of the trot is quite different. The canter still is very important, and there's a lot of marks to be had in the canter work of the Grand Prix. Like, you've got the pirouettes that are double marks, you've got your one-tempies, and you've got your zigzag. These things really require a horse with a top canter. But then look at, yeah, thanks, Kika. Look at the 33% for Piaffe and Passage. This is important, as more important than your walk and your trot, your Piaffe and your Passage, and almost equal to your canter work. So to be a good Grand Prix horse, we have to have one that has some natural talent for Piaffe and Passage. Okay. Oh, back one. Yep, there you go. What are the qualities? So some of you have some really top quality small tour horses. And when I say that they can be different, it doesn't mean they are different. You can have a horse that's a top small tour horse and turns into a top Grand Prix horse. That is our hope, but they're not always the same. A top Prix St. George I1 horse has to have a very strong rhythm in all three gaits. So that means that every gait is impressive in its power, in its walk doesn't have cadence, but in the clarity of the gaits, in the trot and the canter, cadence and impulsion, really, really important. The other thing in the small tour horse, the ability to collect the walk without rhythm problems is really quite important. That if you have rhythm problems in the extended or collected walk or in the walk pirouettes, that can really impact a score negatively. You must have a super canter, and I know you've all heard this how many times: don't buy the trot, buy the walk and the canter. That's because the walk and the canter are closely related, but buy a canter. That's important. The trot, you can, with good training, you can really improve a trot. And I still see, though, that we all get wowed by a super amazing trot. And try, when you're looking for your next Grand Prix horse, try not to be wowed too much by the trot, because oftentimes those big, impressive trots are a little bit hard to piaffe and passage with. In the small tour horse, you need calmness, you need stability, and you need really good balance, because in the Prix St. George, they want quite a forward test. You want to be riding this stuff quite forward. You can't be bringing them back to get your balance. So that means the horse has to be able to balance in bigger, more expressive gaits. That is something that comes with training, of course, but it also has a little bit to do with their natural ability to balance over all four legs instead of running when they go forward. Good Prix St. George horses have an uphill tendency and they need shoulder freedom. They need ground covering gaits. All three gaits need to be ground covering. And a good extended trot has got a little bit more weight to it for a Prix St. George horse. So that, you know, when there's just not all that many movements. And when you have three extensions, they have more weight for your final mark. Cadence gaits, good cadence. So you're talking about the boom, 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 you know, the power and the amplitude. That adds points for a horse. And of course, they need to be sound. It doesn't matter how talented this horse is. If they're broken every 6 months, you don't get where we would need to go. So, you know, every horse will have an injury here and there, but there's some that are plagued by it, and that really hurts the horse's his progress along the way. So that's what we need for a small tour horse. Let's look at what you need for a Grand Prix horse. Next. Go back again. Help me. There we go. Nope. There we go. Top Grand Prix horse. Big thing, it'll help you so much if their hind leg likes to be quick by itself. If its natural thing is to just get engagement, that's going to help you. You won't have to train that in. You can train it in if you're really good, but it's much easier if you start with a quick hind leg. You need three good gaits. It's probably better that they're not extravagant. That trot especially, the more extravagant they are as a young horse, it's often difficult to collect for piaffe and passage. In the past, in the World Young Horse Championships, they were really rewarding horses with huge gaits. And then they found, you know, after 5 years, none of these horses were turning into Grand Prix horses because they were having difficulty. Improved breeding has brought it so that they are getting bigger gaits and collectability. So it's improving with the breeding, but still better to start with good balance and a quick hind leg than it is to start with a huge trot. They must have a super canter though, super canter, and that does not mean huge. There are horses that have these monster canters. It takes 8 strides. It's very uphill, takes 8 strides to go down a long wall. Hard to collect. Uphill, round, balanced. That's what you need. The ability to shorten the trot, even with a young horse, to shorten the trot and not quit behind. That'll tell you if you've got a horse that's going to find the Grand Prix easy or a little bit more difficult. In the Grand Prix horse, we need a clear uphill tendency. It's much easier to ride a horse that wants to be too uphill and make it a little bit lower in front than it is to train a horse that wants to be low in front and get the horse so that it correctly comes uphill. So just, you know, if it's got a clear uphill tendency, you're making everybody's job a little bit easier. Hotter, this is a question mark. You can train a horse to be hot, but it's a little easier if they're a little hot on their own. And sometimes these horses in the past, you know, have been erratic at the lower levels because there's not enough for them to do. They, you know, maybe the horse has a little problem doing a collected walk, but man, it piafs because it's hot. So possibly, I mean, I'm not telling you to go out and get a horse or a horse that you cannot walk. That's a little too hot to be doing this. But we do want them to do some stuff on their own when you're looking for a top Grand Prix horse. They need to be trainable because it's a lot of work what we're asking them to do. And again, sound. But there is, so the difference that you saw in the chart and what you see in the test is that it seems like the biggest difference is that they have to piaffe and they have to passage and they have to do one tempies. And that's true movement-wise. But there's so much more to doing a good Grand Prix test than just piaffe and passage and one tempies. You have to be able to put very difficult movements together very quickly. One corner to prepare, one corner to finish a movement, one corner to prepare the next movement. So that means your half vault has to be very effective. Your horse has to be very through. You have to be able to instantly improve your horse and not take a 20-meter circle to do it in order to put a test together. I know a lot of people who can piaffe and passage in one tempi, but they cannot put a test together because it takes 3 circles of preparation to be able to do that. So there is more to just being able to do these movements, to being able to show it off in the ring for the judges. You need to have precision and you have to have accuracy. Those judges do not allow you to go on the wrong diagonal without letting you know that with their scores. You have to be able to do all of this stuff while maintaining harmony and ease. It can't look that difficult. And this is the reason, this is the problem. We all see someone like Charlotte or Carl do the tests and think, well, that's not that hard. But it is so hard. Those guys are just that good that they can make this work look easy. It's not. Once you've been trying to do it, you know how difficult it is. So, questions. Can you, okay, good. Can I explain, this is from Carlos. Can you explain a little about how it seems like a quick leg? What we want, a slow leg is one that comes off the ground slowly. So I always think one of my words is that they look like they're stepping through mud or quicksand. So it's hard for them to get their legs off the ground. That's a slow hind leg. If you can think of a horse that pats the ground with a hind leg, like maybe towards hot coals, somebody stepping over hot coals, boop, boop, boop. You don't want to put your leg down for too long. That would be a quicker hind leg. That is a better place to start if we want to do a Grand Prix. Does that help? Okay. So now we go on to a little specifics about from the small tour to the Grand Prix work. And this is medium tour as well, intermediate A, intermediate B. Your 2 tempies, this is a young horse that I have that just started the Prix St. George this year. So oh, by the way, these photos are by Keika. Your 2 tempies, they need to have all of these requirements, all of these basics before you start your ones. If you don't have these requirements, your ones will be what I call leg salad. They are not going to be clear to the horse what you want, and they're not going to work very well. And it's much better to be prepared to do the next level in your training very well, and then it will be much clearer for your horse and much easier for him to learn. So we want your 2 tempies to be easy to be done. You should be able to do 2 tempies in harmony. They need to be 99% clean, not 50% clean in your 2s. They need to be balanced. And along with balance, meaning that the horse is not running down a hill and is not falling left and right. So of course that comes to my next one, which is straight. They have to be straight, or you have to be able to modify your horse to keep him straight. Anything that's wrong with your 2 tempies will be much bigger wrong in your 1 tempies. They need to be active, they need to be uphill, and they need to be instant to your leg. If there's a little lag time in your 2 tempies, that the 1 tempies won't work because they have to happen like that. So those things, before you start thinking you are going to train ones, ask yourself if you can do all of that. So I hope you can see this video. This is the same horse. He started Pre-St. George in November of last year. And we got shut down and he'd done a few Pre-St. Georges at Global with very good marks. And I said, well, then I might as well. I think the 2s are good enough for me to start 1s. This is him a week ago. It's wet out. And because the 2s were good enough, these are his 1s. Good. So I hope some of you able to see that. Maria, I'll talk about the Piaffe in a moment, okay? The 2s, as you can see, they weren't perfectly straight, but they were pretty straight. And I'm able in the 2s to help keep him straight, and they all worked. They were quick, they were uphill, and they're clean, and they're active. So then when I had that kind of 2s, I started to say, okay, now I can start with the 1 tempies. I'll just let it run through one more time and then I'll go to the next. Any other questions about 1 tempies, you guys? No? Okay. Do I want 2s big or better to have them smaller size or to go for the 1s? In general, I want to be able, good question, Keika. I want the 2s, I want to be able to make the 2s big or small. I want them that adjustable. And then when you start the 1s, you can't make them too big when you start them. You have to start the 1s usually a little bit smaller so that the horse can keep his hind legs underneath them throughout. But then I also see the other problem where people make them too small and the horse doesn't keep going confidently into them. All right, good question. Oh, there you go. I was giving you a question period. Oh, really good question. Do I use different lines to make my 2 tempies to my 1 tempies? Absolutely, yes. As you saw from that video, I should be able to have straight 4s, 3s, and 2s on a diagonal. And when I start 1s, I only do them on the wall. And that helps the horse when he's just learning, because in the beginning, they don't know what they're doing. They're only reacting. So it starts to tell the horse that this is a new thing. And so I will only do the 1s on the wall or the inside track. A little bit, sometimes the inside track helps because you give them a bit of room. But when I can ride them, like this horse he's not trained enough for me to do 1 tempies on a diagonal yet. I only do them on the wall, but the 4s, 3s, and 2s are on the diagonals. If I'm having trouble on the diagonals with my 4s, 3s, and 2s, I don't even try 1s. I make sure that I can have them straight on the diagonal, and then I'm ready again. And sometimes that happens even, if that happened tomorrow with that horse, I would say, okay, no 1s today. I need to be able to have these 4s, 3s, and 2s straight, and then I can come back to the 1s. As obvious, he understands them now. And then Nina asked me, what should you focus to look for when you look at top riders that make it look so easy? I think a lot of riders, it's hard to see the small things they do when they have fine-tuned everything. What tips can you give on what to look for when you watch them? That really good, Nina. I think that when you go to watch a top rider, and I think warm-up is better than watching them in the show ring, but what you should do is watch one thing. Watch how they hold their reins. Watch how they shorten the reins. Do that. Only watch that. Instead of seeing the big picture, only watch that, and you will start to understand what they do with that. The next time, say, I'm going to look at the quality of how they put their leg gate on, and only watch that. It's hard not to get to look at the whole picture and go, wow, isn't that amazing? But if you really want to learn, watch one thing. Watch how much bend they do. If you want to find out how they're straightening, watch what they're doing with the horse's shoulders as they go forward. So try to do one thing at a time, and you can learn that thing. You can't learn it all by looking at the whole picture. That's a really good question. All right. The next difference between small tour and medium and large tour is starting, you have to be able to piaffe and passage. And I just wanted to put this picture in. This is a 5-year-old. This is Claudia Oliveira, who has worked with her 3 times only. But this is a good, I just love her to death. This is from my last Grand Prix Mare Asia. This is her first and only baby. And that's a good quick hind leg. There you go. And also some natural talent, as you can see. And I just had to show that picture off. This, when to start piaffe and passage. I'm just going to pause this. There we go. You can begin work in hand when they're quite young. And she's 5. I figured, you know, but you can even start before that if you don't think piaffe and passage. To have good work in hand, piaffe and passage, you have to have the horse well trained on the ground. So that means we would like to have the horse so it works off your body. It comes to you and it backs away. It comes to you and it backs away. These things, and on both reins, right rein and left rein, we do it way too much only on the left, with us where I am here, instead of the other way around. Somebody needs to get muted. Okay. If you start work in hand early with a horse, you will not feel the pressure to make the horse piaffe and passage. It's just play when you start it early. So I don't want you starting the work under the saddle too early, but the work in hand on the ground, you can play with it. And if you start them like this one's 5, she's not gonna need to be Grand Prix until she's 8 or 9. So there is no pressure on this horse. So it can just be fun. We have fun and she gets a sugar and it's great. She thinks that piaffe is she's gonna think it's fun. So I'm going to show this to you, this video clip, a couple of times so that you can see it's quite forward that we're going in the work. And she gets a few really nice steps and I stop and she gets a sugar. And she thinks that this is the greatest thing ever, that she gets to play with this stuff. I have no side reins on. I just have a snaffle bridle and I have a little whip, not a big one. And so this is so easy for her. Now, this is the start of work in hand. Obviously, there's all sorts of different ways to do it. And having a round pen is lovely. I would put some horses in side reins, absolutely. And it depends on the horse. And then as this horse got older, I would put more pressure on it, obviously, as well. But for now, it's only fun. This is the start. Now, when to start it under saddle. This is the same Prix St. George horse, starting the work under the saddle. And there's a few things that you need before you start the work under saddle. Well, number 1 is you should have some work in hand started before you do it under saddle. Then for starting the work under saddle, you need very clear walk, trot, walk transitions where the horse doesn't change his balance, stays through, just steps into the walk, steps into the trot, steps into the walk, steps into the trot. Doesn't slow down going into the walk, doesn't fall forward going into the trot. Those are important. You can never do too many walk, trot, walk transitions. You should also be able to do what I call a small round trot with ease. No leg, loose hand, soft leg, where the horse can do a little trot over its back where it just picks up his legs in a diagonal. that you're not asking much from at all. He just learns to pick himself up in a diagonal without impulsion. If you can do that with a soft hand and a soft leg, you can start to put a few aids into it to bring it more towards piaffe and then more towards passage, where you add some power into it. So this, the small little trot is a really important concept, and it has to be done without pressure for the horse. From there, we can go to piaffe and passage. You should be able to play with the tempo in your trot, which means that you have a normal trot, and if you want to make it quicker, not more forward necessarily, but quicker, you can. You should be able to make it slower as well. So if you can quicken the trot and you can slow the trot and it's still trot, you will be able to work forward from there to piaffe and to passage. All right, so that, and generally what I would like to say is a horse that's good at third level, a good third level horse, a starting fourth level horse, that would be where I would start to play more with the piaffe and passage under saddle. Okay, next question. If I have a horse with groundwork that's doing good steps of piaffe, and I've already started doing some steps of piaffe with the rider on, what would be the number of sessions of piaffe training per week? Well, I think that groundwork maybe 2 times a week maximum. Not every day. Although with that 5-year-old filly, I usually do like once around the ring and play with it almost every day I get on. She only goes 4 days a week, but I'll play with it 4 days a week. To really piaffe train, 2 days a week. That does not mean, I think every single day that you're on your horse, you should be visiting small trot. You should be visiting quick trot. You should be visiting slow trot. That way, every single day, you're getting a trot that you have like an accordion, if you know what I mean, an accordion. That you have the ability to make it more like this and more like this, and it's not a trick. It is just you being the leader and being able to make that horse dance smaller or dance bigger. Dance with less cadence or with more power. So every single day, the idea of where you're going to Grand Prix needs to be in your training session. And that's not the same as we're going to piaffe and passage every day, okay? Hope that answered that. Questions? We're doing it without the slides. With a young horse with a big walk, is it better to start with some steps of half steps, not to make them tense? Yes, Rosina. Yes. This is when I say small little trot without tension, a lot of that is half steps. When what you saw the work in hand that I did with the filly, the 5-year-old, that's half steps. So yes, even with a young horse with not a big walk, yes, it's better to start with half steps. Think of your half step. The piaffe should always be trained forward, always with the forward tendency. If you train it on the spot, the horses, it's very difficult to make the transition from piaffe to passage. So I can't remember which one of my instructors, it was in Europe, one of them, it was a big moment when they said, we train piaffe on the spot on Sundays, and the rest of the time it goes forward. And that was for the made Grand Prix horses. That was for the ones that are showing internationally. We train Grand Prix on the spot on Sundays. That's all. So that doesn't mean that's a rule. It's the idea behind that statement, that when the horse is doing lovely forward half steps, piaffe steps, that is stepping forward, you can start to bring that more and more on the spot. All right, so don't be in a hurry to bring them on the spot. So a couple of other things that have a much higher difficulty at the Grand Prix than at Small Tour, but that you've already got well started, hopefully, at Small Tour, are the canter pirouettes and also the zigzag. much higher difficulty, and there are double marks for them. So we have to get really good at them. The canter pirouettes, Prix St. George versus the Grand Prix pirouettes. I mean, the good ones that can really pirouette in the Prix St. George will have less difficulty making the jump to the Grand Prix. But we all know that horses that have a little bit of difficulty with the pirouettes, we can fake it a little bit at the Prix St. George level, and you cannot fake it on that center line when you're doing Grand Prix. You have to be able to maintain as close to a 3-beat rhythm as possible. Even as you slow the tempo down to help the balance, we want a 3-beat rhythm or the appearance of it. And of course, we also know that when you slow a horse down, they do get a little bit 4-beat. It's normal, but they can't get 4-beat because the front end's on the ground. If they get 4-beat, it's because they sit a little bit more on the outside hind leg for a little bit longer. We need them to sit well. This is a Prix St. George horse that you see this picture of, and he's sitting quite well in a Prix St. George test. That we need to now get so that you can do all the other things that I'm asking for Grand Prix. You have to be able to come in shoulder 4, not with haunches in. You have to be able to finish in shoulder 4. It has to be that precise. You cannot spin around. Well, you can, you just won't get a good mark. You cannot turn a horse on the middle. It will not do well if it's a small circle. You have to be able to start and finish on the center line, not 3 meters off, which we can fudge in the Prix St. George. And also the I1, a little bit less, but center line, there is no escaping the center line. And you have to do it at the exact letter on the center line. So this is very good control of your pirouettes. It takes time to be able to do this. And again, here we have, the idea of maybe not the hugest canter will help you develop this kind of control for your pirouettes. Then we're looking at the zigzag. Now this is not an International Grand Prix horse, but it's the only video I had that was easy, but doing a Grand Prix zigzag. It's hard. For me, I think it's got the most happening for any movement in the Grand Prix. You have to, the biggest thing about the zigzag is that you can have equal bend, equal balance, right and left. I'm going to play this one more time and then it's distracting, so I'm going to pause it. In the zigzag, the balance is more important than the bend. If you have a horse that can maintain shoulder 4 or close to parallel throughout the changes of lead and throughout the different half passes, that already starts with a 7. I'm sorry if there's any judges here, I hope I'm right, but in my experience, you can show a 7 without showing a lot of bend in the half passes. If you can do that and show bend and go more sideways, you go up from there with it. The changes in between, at this point, we're assuming that that you can half pass. So now it's the changes in between that become more important than the half passes. You have to be able to place them equally on the center line. And you all know that horses are not equal 100%. So that means you might have to ride with more bend one direction. You might have to ride more sideways one direction. You might have to ride a little straighter the other direction and a little less sideways. So you have to be able to adjust for your horse's inequalities. And then, of course, correct count. You don't get going with a 5 and a 7. You have to have 6, 6, 6 in the middle of there. So there's so much happening in the zigzag, and it does take a while to get there. Questions? Anybody? Questions on the zigzags or the pirouettes? No? Okay. Onward. Oh, we're almost done. So actually, this is great timing. We're almost done. this is another, like I said, there's so many presentations to be done and so much learning to be done within this presentation that I've given you. One of the biggest things, if you have desires to get on the team, if you have desires to go to the Olympics or the Pan American Games, if you have desires to go Grand Prix, you have to do some goal setting. It doesn't happen, something this difficult doesn't happen on its own. It doesn't happen because you wish it. It happens because you plan it, and you have to plan it really, really well. You can begin with the dream of going to the Olympics for your country. That's where you begin, but that doesn't get you there. You have to choose your long-term goal. Is it going to be the Olympics in 2024? Is it going to be in 2028? When you choose this long-term goal, is it going to be in 20 years because you're 16 and you don't have the resources quite yet to be able to get there? Be realistic and be very specific in your long-term goal. Write it down. When you have a long-term goal, and I would love to work with people on how to set goals and setting your own priorities and your own goals. When you have your long-term goal, you have to work backwards on a timeline. And from that from the long term, you go to medium. Like if it's an 8-year goal, what do you have at 4 years? And if you have a 4-year goal, then you work backwards from there. What do you want? What do you need to have at 2 years to be able to get there at 4 years? And from that, you can go to 1 year, you can go to 6 months, you can go to next week from there. You can get very specific with your goal setting. When you have your goal setting, you have to make it real. Don't keep it here. To make these things real, you have to write it down, and then you have to tell people. Puts a little pressure on you when you tell people what you want to do and how you're going to do it. When you make it real, it might happen. Still, things happen. We know that. But if you keep it in here and don't tell people or tell yourself, it doesn't happen. Of course, when you set this goal line, you have to be ready to be flexible. Horses get hurt, people get hurt, coronavirus comes, things happen in the world that make it so that you're going to have to be able to change your goals mid-stride. That doesn't mean that you don't make your goals, but you have to be flexible. That means build in a little extra time to your goal line. Then you can maybe still reach your long-term goal when life happens in between. You have a baby, something like that. Be ready to shift your goal as necessary. Try not to, sometimes you have to shift your goal 100%, but that's not what we're looking for, right? Once you have your goal and your timeline, then you have to evaluate what you have, and is it possible to reach that goal with what you have, with your horse, with the horses you have, with your trainer, with the trainers you have available to you, with your veterinarians, with your farriers, with the competitions that are available to you. Are your resources sufficient to be able to get there? And one thing that we should talk about, resources also include money. But there's a lot of people. You do not have to be Georgina Bloomberg to get to the Olympics. There are a lot of people that have made it there without personal resources, but they've figured out how to get the resources to help them get these goals. And so therefore, that's my last point. Then you have to figure out which of your resources you need to improve upon and problem solve. How do you get this? How do you get that? If you don't have the money to go and buy yourself a top horse, how do you do this? Maybe your answer is buy a foal with great breeding. Maybe that's the way. Leave it somewhere where it's not so expensive to bring it up, and then you have to learn how to train it. That's what a lot of people have done in the past if they didn't have their personal resources. So this is something that we need to talk about throughout. Every one of you can start tonight and jot down the long-term goal. Be realistic about it, but be specific for me, okay? Any questions on that? All right, so I'm going to leave it up to some general questions now because we're at the end. Let's start your journey. You have to think about where you want to go. I would love to be part of that journey and help you guys with your goal setting, help you guys with your training. The internet is a great resource while we can't travel. And hopefully soon we're going to feel safe enough to travel so that I can see you in person. Any other questions while we're talking? Anyone? All right, Isabel, do you want to come back on?
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. No sé si los que están presentes tienen preguntas, las pueden escribir en el chat y aprovechamos a Shannon que la tenemos acá con nosotros, todo tipo de preguntas, desde entrenamiento hacia, no sé si les quedó a todo el mundo súper claro la conferencia que Shannon nos da y pues aprovechemos la que la tenemos acá. Si alguno quiere que le abra el micrófono, porfa, levanta la mano y con mucho gusto se lo abrimos si no la quiere escribir, sino que la quiere decir.
For the half steps, what frame do I recommend? Okay. Depends on the horse for the half steps. As probably, I could say that with every movement that we do. Some horses need to be ridden around in order for them to let go in their shoulders. Some horses need to be ridden around 80% of the time, 2 round for the show ring, in order for them to let go in the base of the neck. Some horses need to be ridden almost a little bit above the bit in order to help them get their balance onto their hind legs. So it really depends on what the horse is doing at that particular time. Most of the time, if we went back to that video, let me see if I can go back to this video. If you see where this horse, the 5-year-old, I've got her quite high. She's a little bit above the bit. So that's where all I'm looking at right now is how do we get her hind legs to understand what they need to do. Oh, this is good. We're getting a ton. So it really does depend on your horse, Maria. Thanks for the question. I got that answered. For the zigzag, Juan Carlos, for the zigzag, what exercises are good for shoulder work? I think for shoulder 4 is what you're asking. Very good exercises. I mean, we can go into this in a whole another presentation, but leg yield. Instead of half passing, leg yields, where the horse is bent left and you're going right, and you're making sure that the shoulder goes to the right first. Then in that, you should also then be able to, in the bend left, put the hips over more to the right, and the horse is in almost shoulder in the new direction, but still in the old lead. And then the flying change. And then you're in shoulder in, all ready for the new half pass. So that, I probably need to explain that once or twice more and maybe draw pictures of what I want and we go from there. But there are exercises for that. Do I train my musicals, Carlos? Or how do you learn to ride to music? I don't train my musical freestyles very often. I don't do a lot of that because it's not great for training. I do, before I go into a musical freestyle, I know my music very, very well. Like I know every beat in the music off the horse. And I will have ridden through it 2 or 3 times with video. And that is how I'll train it, rather than me riding the horse to the musical, because it is not great for the training, the quality of your training. Okay? How do we decide if it's better to show intermediate A, B, or 2 before the Grand Prix? Thanks, Keika. Intermediate A and B, I don't like. However, I don't like them for show because they're very busy and they're very picky and they don't really promote a horse that feels that it can stay forward in the work. Intermediate 2 is a friendlier test. It has less, intermediate 2 has more 1-tempies. So if you're not very good at your 1-tempies, maybe you want to try intermediate A or B. But the intermediate 2 is a friendlier test to get the horse piaffing and passaging and doing 1-tempies in the show ring. However, that being said, I think every horse and rider should be able to do every transition well that is in the intermediate A and B. So in training, you should ride through those tests a few times and see where you're weak. And if you're weak in those transitions, train the transitions, and it will make your intermediate 2 and Grand Prix better. Hope that answers that. How can I train, okay, from Kalina, how do I train the quicker hind legs if it's not natural from the horse? Okay, well, that's me right now with my lovely, not the 5-year-old, but the other one. He's got a great hind leg, but it's not natural to be so quick. So the answer is lots of that little trot and lots of transitions. And transitions that you insist are instant and through. And you can get that horse so that he reacts to your hind legs, that his hind legs react to your leg and your seat instantly. And you can improve the hind leg, how quick it is off the ground, with so many transitions. Clear, clean, balanced transitions. Within the gait, so small trot, big trot, and small canter, big canter, quick canter, slow canter, and between the gaits, walk, trot, walk. What do you recommend if you have a horse with a big walk and you want to teach piaffe and passage? What exercises can you practice to keep the walk calm and good? You should be careful in training piaffe from the walk in a horse that wants to go lateral. You need to be very careful. What can help keep that horse under saddle, keep it clear between walk to trot or walk to piaffe, is doing it in a little shoulder in or even leg yield, so that you're just doing one hind leg instead of trying to do both hind legs at the same time. So under saddle, do it a lot off the wall and moving the horse around when you ask for your half steps from the walk. Be very careful. If the horse starts to go lateral or get tight in the back, you need to go away from it, and you have to just move his hind legs around in the shoulder in or leg yield. That would be a horse that would be better suited to starting the piaffe in hand, and then also starting to bring the horse into piaffe and passage from the trot. Bring the trot back into a littler trot, into more piaffe, and then back out again, okay? What do you think is the most important body aid in piaffe without whip? Your seat is the most important. And usually in the piaffe, I try not to sit back. I try to get a little bit more like something that can compress up and down like this, because we want the horse to start to come up and down under your body. So instead of leaning back and opening up, you just close your hip joint a tiny bit and try to get the trot up and down underneath you. Do I start with piaffe first and then passage, or the other way around? Depends on the horse. I think I start both almost at the same time on almost every horse. I might start them differently. I might do the passage under saddle and the piaffe in hand. Or I generally don't do passage in hand because I'm not very good at it. I can take the horse that knows how to passage under saddle and do it in hand, but I will do the passage under saddle first. So it really does depend on the horse, whether I do piaffe first and then passage, but mostly I would say I'm introducing both at the same time to the horse, maybe not exactly the same way. Any other questions? These are good questions, you guys. It's really good. And I do think the whip, okay, Juliana, you asked about the most important body aid in Piaffe without whip. The whip can be quite helpful in the Piaffe. The overuse of the whip is not helpful because, of course, when you're in the ring, you are not allowed to use that. But it can be quite helpful. And if we want the horse to get quick, how a whip touches a horse, you think about how quick that is. That's how quickly we want the horse to react. And your leg should, if you want a horse to get quick in its reactions, your aids have to be kind of like the touch of a whip on a horse. Okay? Oh, Carlos, thank you. We miss you too. I miss you too. Okay. All right. Any other questions while you got me? How often do I do trot half passes of the Grand Prix? They're tough on joints. Once a day. I do most of these things once or twice. I also don't do very many extended trots. I might do that once a day. Even if I have a horse that is super at them, which I do right now, I do it once and it's kind of fun. It's just to visit them. The trot half passes of the Grand Prix, it's good not to do anything again and again. It's good not to drill anything again and again. If you're having trouble with something, so for some reason we can't get over in the Grand Prix half pass, then go away from that, try to address what the problem is. It doesn't bend enough. Address the bend on a 20-meter circle. And then you can come back and try the half pass one more time. It doesn't move its hind legs well enough to do the trot half pass. Go do a couple turn on the forehands. Then come back to it. Rather than drill the movement again and again, all of those things will put a lot of stress on your horse's joints. Drilling a movement again and again is the worst thing that you can do. Do the movement, figure out what's weak in the movement, train that, and then you can try the movement again one more time maybe and see, hopefully, if you did it well, it will be better. All right. Anything else? All righty. I'm really glad to have seen you all here. And I hope this starts a dialogue. You are all welcome to ask any questions that pertain to your particular horses. On a separate chat, of course, you probably all have my phone number. And if you don't have my phone number, Isabel can share that on WhatsApp. It's a good idea if we work through the Federation as well for this. There are the more simple things like halt rein back and the transition canter trot that we forget to practice. Isn't that so true? And I do that. I do a halt rein back almost every day with each horse, once a day. I don't drill it either, but if there's a problem, then I know about it. Canter trot, those of you who've taken lessons from me with your FEI horses, you know that we do that every single day. And if it's not good, that's all we do. Sometimes you see a good pirouette one side and not so good the other. What can you do to make that better? Go to the basics on the bad side, which means working pirouettes, big pirouettes, working on the quality of the canter, and pirouette canter on straight lines. So you go back to the basics on that side that's difficult. If it's not so good one side than the other, there's other things that are not so good on that one side. So it all, again, comes all back to the basics on that side. How do I teach good halts? Always they finish forward. A halt always finishes forward to the bit. And that means you never, if they don't halt stepping forward to the bit, you do it through the walk. I hardly ever do a sudden halt. The only time to do a sudden halt would be if my horse is not halting and running away from me, and then it's going to be sudden. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. It's so nice to see you, and I love having this chat so that I know who's there. And hopefully I see you all soon, and we will be putting together another class, I think, Isabel, soon.
Muchas gracias a todos los que tengan comentarios o nos quieran dejar sugerencias. Les agradezco si nos las hacen llegar a info igual y esperamos verlos muy pronto en la próxima conferencia. Muchas gracias.